So good morning, and welcome to Eliot Unitarian Chapel. I am the Reverend Barbara Gaydon, your lead minister, and I'm so glad to see you today. We're offering a simpler, quieter version of our usual service this Sunday after Christmas. Just me, our wonderful guest speaker, Dee Evans, and our awesome tech crew, Ken Denson and Nick Rousseau. As we regroup in this latest phase of the pandemic, we are offering a few services online like this to keep everybody as safe as we can. If you are brand new to Eliot Chapel, we are so glad that you chose to be with us today. We hope that you will feel warmly welcomed and that today's message speaks to you, and that we will see you again. If you are new, please drop a line to welcome@eliotchapel.org, letting us know that you're here. That's welcome@eliotchapel.org. This is a liberal religious community of spiritual seekers. We welcome you in the fullness of your age, race, ethnicity, gender expression, sexual orientation, and religious background. Our faith is not lived in creeds, but in deeds, not in the hereafter, but in the here and now. Our core values are reason, freedom, respect, and love. Every week, we share half of our offering with an organization that promotes our values in the wider community. This month, we've been sharing our offering with Room at the Inn, which shelters our unhoused neighbors. For more than 25 years, up until the pandemic, Eliot Chapel has partnered with Room at the Inn 3 times a month, offering dinner, a comfortable place to sleep, and breakfast the next day. But since the pandemic, guests now stay at Central Place, which is much nicer for them than going church to church. But they still need our financial support for food and building costs. So please give generously to our long-term partner in service. It's Room at the Inn. I will put the introductions in the chat, and you can find them on our website under giving. You would start a text that is 73256. 73256, and I'll give you the rest of the instructions. In the Unitarian Universalist faith, we light a chalice, or we would if the chalice cooperated. We light a chalice to open our service. May the flame of this chalice kindle our hearts for love, justice, and service. So I am excited about our guest speaker this morning, Dee Evans. She is speaking from her home. She's joining us from her home, and we are delighted to have her with us. She was born and raised in Chicago. Her first career was as a doctoral level psychologist, where she worked mainly in the forensic division of mental health for the state of Illinois. She is now, are you still an Eden seminarian, or did you graduate, Dee? I've surprised her, sorry, with a question.
I graduated.
She graduated already, so.
And I'm doing an internship at Abraham Lincoln.
That's right. Yeah, we're serving there, but congratulations for graduating seminary. That's not an easy thing to pull off, I know.
Thank you.
So I'm looking forward to her message this morning. Welcome, Dee Evans.
Our reading today is from William Wordsworth. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts. A sense of sublime, of something far more deeply infused, whose dwelling is the light of the setting suns and round ocean and the living air, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of thought, and rolls through all things. Greetings. It's good to be here. For many of us, Christmas trees are still up, and leftovers from Christmas dinner will be served today. For others, who do not celebrate Christmas, we still deal with the after Christmas sales in stores and friends still engaging in Christmas rituals. Thinking about this, I decided that although it is technically after Christmas, talking about the Incarnation is still appropriate. The whole idea of incarnation raises questions about its meaning for Unitarian Universalists, and also seeing what the incarnation has to do with joy, which is your theme for the month. There are many definitions of incarnation. Simply put, it is the divine, God, or a soul, or an entity entering some facet of creation. Most often, it's referred to the divine entering a human being. Most of us in the United States are familiar with the Christian meaning of incarnation. God or the divine entered a certain human being at a certain time in history. Centuries before this, in fact, the 23rd century before the Common Era, the first king in Mesopotamia declared himself divine. After that, pharaohs and Asian kings and queens were seen as divine. Divine despite their very human presentation and foils and at times ruthlessness. In China and Japan, emperors were seen as divine. Both Buddhism and Shintoism in Japan held to the belief of the divinity of the emperor. It was only in recent times, after the loss of World War II, that the Emperor of Japan declared that he was not divine. The Romans and Greeks also viewed their emperors as divine. Religions such as Buddhism and Hinduism had sects that believed the divine became incarnate in some being, or a Buddha was reincarnated in a human being. In the Hebrew scriptures, the whole resistance of Israel to having a king is that the kings of various tribes were seen as gods, but they believed in only one God. So it became very contentious and contradictory to have a king, but still they ended up with a king. By the time of the development of the Greek and Roman empires, prior to and during the time of Jesus, the idea of king as divine, a god, was an entrenched concept. Initially, Jesus was not considered divine. Jesus was not a king and was part of a Jewish community who professed belief in one God. In the 4th century, Constantine, the emperor, was trying to unite his kingdom. To do this, he felt he had to unite the various Christian sects who believed differently about the divinity of Jesus. So he called the Council of Nicaea, during which Jesus was declared the incarnate God. In all the iterations of the incarnation, the purpose of a divine being becoming incarnate, whether in a pharaoh, a king, or in Jesus, was to save humanity from destruction. So incarnation and salvation were tied together. Most of us who are UUs have gone through, well, not most of us, many of us, let me correct that, who have gone through crises of faith before we became Unitarian Universalists. We all have stories, and they are equally important in how we became Unitarian Universalists. I want to briefly share my story, not because it is any more important than anyone else's, but because it led me to an entirely new meaning of incarnation. I had taken my first vows as a nun in the Roman Catholic faith. Ironically, it was the education I got from the nuns by great biblical and theological scholars that led to my crisis of faith. I went from being a theist to being an agnostic. Everything I believed in crumbled in a heap of disbelief. In this heap of disbelief, I flailed. However, I found a solitary place to think, in all places, a stairway landing. It had a large window and it had a perfect view of a tree. The beauty and symmetry of its bare branches awed me. The solidness of its trunk, rising from its well-grounded roots, seemed to be the only thing in my life not in flux, not uprooted. I would stand alone in silence, just contemplating that tree. As spring arrived and the leaves emerged, I made plans to move forward with a lot of pain and tears. One day, the idea popped into my head. Maybe the divine is in that tree. I had no idea what I even meant by that. If you had asked me what was the divine, I would have been speechless. In spring, I walked the campus grounds, and I started looking at nature and wondering if the divine, God if you will, was incarnate in nature, and further if the world was sacred. My idea of incarnation became not one of God without entering something, but the divine within emerging. Now, that wasn't a new concept. Other people have come to that before, but for me, it was new. Since that time, my theology has evolved, but this idea of incarnation is tied to being a Unitarian Universalist. For example, in our first principle, we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all persons. This flows out of our Unitarian heritage. In her recent article in UU World, the magazine for Unitarian Universalists, our president, Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray, points out Unitarian theologians believed in the inherent goodness of the individual. Unitarian theologians saw humans not as sin-tainted individuals, but people of worth. Well, there are problems with Unitarian theology, as there are problems with every theology. Worth in all life, not just human life, is something we have moved toward in our principles. In our seventh principle, we affirm respect for the interconnected web of all existence. Perhaps the web itself is the divine, the sacred of our existence. Perhaps it is the presence of the spirit that Wordsworth wrote about. When we look at the interconnectedness of the universe and what modern science has taught us, we know that our very survival depends upon the realization that we are interconnected. If we ignore this connection, we threaten our very existence. This is evident in global warming. Widening the circle of concern, a Unitarian Universalist report of 2020 states that we need faith tenets that we can all hold on to in our ever-changing world. Perhaps the inherent sacredness of the universe is a possible tenet. The divine became incarnate in the past to liberate and save humans. But if the divine, whatever that may be, is inherent in the entire universe, that opens the possibility that we can save ourselves. It means we can liberate our world from all that leads to the destruction of our universe and ourselves. That means we can do work together on saving the planet from global warming and work to not only eliminate racism, but to become actively anti-racist. That opens the possibility to developing a life worth living. So the message of incarnation is a hopeful message. It is a message that says we don't have to live like we are living now. And that makes me want to do a happy dance. And if we join in that dance together and make our world better together, we have joy. Not the giddy joy that comes from having a new toy. Rather, it's the deep down joy that comes from giving, from doing something worthwhile, no matter how small. It is the joy that comes not just from affirming, but from living our Unitarian Universalist principles. Let us have that joy. Amen, and so may it be.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dee. And thank you, all of you who joined us today. This is the end of our rather shorter service, but we're so glad that you were with us. And I leave you with a blessing, as I always do. Now may the love which overcomes all differences, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. Go in peace. Amen.